Most people don't realize it, but something important quietly disappeared as the world went digital. Attention shortened, patience thinned, silence became uncomfortable. And the people who sense this loss most clearly are often the ones who grew up in the 1990s. There may be a reason for that, not nostalgia and not resistance to technology, but timing. Their nervous systems were shaped by a world that demanded waiting, focus, and presence, and then adulthood asked them to live at a pace their childhood never trained them for. People who grew up in the 1990s don't fully belong to either era. They aren't pre-digital, and they aren't native to constant stimulation either. Their early years taught their minds one rhythm, while modern life introduced another. That gap may explain why they often feel slightly out of sync, but also strangely steady. As children, their lives weren't recorded. Moments didn't come with proof or playback. If something mattered, you had to stay with it while it happened. You couldn't pause cartoons or replay conversations. When something ended, it ended. Something subtle happens when the mind grows up this way. It learns how to remain present without expecting instant reinforcement. This may be where their relationship with attention began to differ. Focus wasn't trained as a skill, it was required by default. And because attention wasn't constantly interrupted, their nervous system learned how to stay engaged without needing stimulation every few seconds. That conditioning tends to show up later as tolerance for silence, patience in conversations, and less panic when nothing's happening. Boredom was common then, and that detail is more important than it sounds. Boredom forced the mind inward instead of outward. There was no feed to escape into, no endless distraction to lean on. For many people today, that internal regulation never fully developed. Instead, stimulation replaced it. And once that happens, silence can feel less like rest and more like threat. When the digital shift arrived, people who grew up in the 1990s felt it happen, slowly at first. Dial-up tones, shared computers, then personal devices. Answers became instant and gaps disappeared. For the first time, thinking wasn't always required to fill empty moments. And something fragile quietly changed. Attention stopped being self-directed and started being externally managed. This might explain why this generation uses technology differently, not perfectly, but differently. They don't just consume it, they remember life without it. So technology becomes a tool rather than an emotional regulator. They can log off without feeling like something essential is missing. Waiting shaped them in ways that are easy to overlook. They waited for songs to come on the radio, for movies to arrive, for moments worth anticipating. That waiting taught their nervous system that not everything urgent is important, and not everything delayed is a problem. Anticipation didn't create anxiety, it created meaning. That lesson still shows up today. They tend to be less reactive, more measured, and less destabilized by uncertainty. When decisions take time, they don't immediately assume failure. They're more comfortable sitting with incomplete information, unfinished thoughts, and unanswered questions, something modern life rarely encourages. What may truly separate them, though, is balance. They understand simplicity without rejecting progress, depth without rejecting convenience, silence without fearing disconnection. They don't feel the need to constantly optimize themselves because their sense of self formed before metrics and feedback loops became normal. Their resilience didn't come from dramatic hardship, it came from friction, small problems without instant solutions, getting lost, being wrong, figuring things out slowly. Those moments quietly built self-trust, the kind that doesn't collapse when reassurance isn't immediately available. This might be why conversations with them feel different. They listen without rushing, they pause without discomfort. They don't confuse speed with intelligence or noise with importance. In a world trained to react instantly, they still know how to respond deliberately. And maybe that's why this mindset matters now. In an age that constantly pulls attention outward, people who grew up in the 1990s carry something increasingly rare, an ability to stay internally anchored.
And once that ability is lost, it's very hard to rebuild.